Chief, this question came in, so I'm going to pose it to you just the way it came in. Would you commit today to releasing the data on racial disparities in arrests for specific crimes similar to what was released in the traffic study? I believe your department has that data, but it's been difficult to get access to it.
So anything that we have, we release. It's FOIAble, so we'd have to release it. But in addition, we're working towards greater transparency. What I'm a little reluctant to do is make the jump that just because there's a disparity, it's a result of police actions. So we recognize poverty is concentrated in certain neighborhoods in this community. Those communities tend to be heavily minority. We've had 6 homicides this year. Each of our victims of homicide was a black or brown individual. Now, for a community that only makes up 20% of the population, that's a real problem. Here in the state of Michigan, the homicide rate by gunfire is 2 per 100,000 for white males. For African American males, it's 50 per 100,000. It's the second highest in the nation. The only state that's higher is Illinois. So we've got some real systemic issues that need to be addressed, and I don't mean to soft pedal the role that law enforcement plays in those disparate outcomes, but I think it's a simplistic view to look at those numbers and say, aha, that's a result of policing alone. It's a much broader picture.
Well, are you then telling us that when you go into an African American community because of these higher rates, that you take on a certain posture?
No, what we do is, so we've embraced data-driven policing as much as most police departments around the country have for the last decade and a half. And that's really helped result in the crime rates falling nationally. So every week, tomorrow morning, we'll meet at 9 o'clock, command staff and support personnel, and we'll look at where our occurrences are. We'll look at where our trends are for nonviolent crimes. We'll look at where our trends are for burglary, robbery, street robberies, residential burglaries, and we'll ensure that our very limited discretionary resources are deployed in areas that we've identified as criminal hotspots. We've got an obligation to the community, to all members of the community, to make sure that first and foremost we're addressing crime. Community's got to be safe. Regardless of what zip code you live in, if you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to walk the dog, or if you forget to lock your door before you go to bed, you should be as comfortable in your home as anyone who lives in any part of the city. So that's our primary mandate, and I think we've done that very well. As we delve deeper into some of these issues to ensure equitable outcomes, I would point to the 21st Century Policing Task Force that the city attorney is leading for us. So we're in our 10th month now. The city brought in consultant Ron Davis, who authored President Obama's report on 21st century policing. And they're looking at each and every one of our policies to ensure that they're not written and they're not applied in a way that may lead to a disparate outcome. So we've been very deliberate in taking a hard look at how we're policing. And that 21st Century Policing Committee consists of equal members of the police department, the unions are represented, but so are members of the community. So I think it's been a very healthy process. But again, as far as we've come, we've got equal distance to cover.
Chief, you're saying then that the data does not set a mindset when they come into a minority community. How do you explain then how a young lady, a 12-year-old, I believe, gets handcuffed and that whole situation? Wasn't that a mindset? Wasn't that a mindset of the officer? So isn't that not problematic, and how are you addressing it?
No, that's certainly problematic, and that issue was one that we were very quick to acknowledge in the community with her parents, with her grandparents, and with her, that led to an outcome that we weren't happy with. And although those officers followed policy, we asked ourselves as an agency, we did some soul searching, if following policy resulted in that outcome, we need to take a look at policy. So that's what led to the creation of the juvenile interaction policy that I alluded to, that gives officers the ability to use their discretion and to feel empowered to do so. So when they see situations like that, they don't necessarily have to go down the list as they've been trained per officer safety protocol. They can look at a situation, assess it, and recognize that that's an individual who needs to be treated differently, either because of age or because of other special considerations.
When will we see these changes rolled out on the street? When will the community be able to experience the changes that you are describing as a change in policy?
So I think we're experiencing them every day. You know, how do you capture a non-incident or a non-occurrence or a good police community citizen contact? We'll handle 170,000 calls for service this year, and we'll handle about 65 citizen complaints. So I look at the steps we've taken collectively as a community: body-worn cameras, training together, policy that addresses specific incidents. And I think that when I look at the numbers and when I talk to community, I think we are making progress. I think sometimes it's when you're in the midst of a battle, and I think this is a battle for us to try to say that it's not would be disingenuous. I think when you're in the midst of that, sometimes it's hard to measure your successes. But I see our successes every day, and I think collectively we're making real progress.
Chief, when you initially responded to that incident, your remarks were heroic. They were something that we would hope to hear from the chief. But then the union got involved, and then you backed away. What happened?
Yeah, I should have chosen my words a little more carefully. And the media, no discredit. I mean, they've got finite amount of time to show a story. So the question I responded to was, how did you feel when you heard Honesty Hodges screaming and crying the way she did? And I replied, as a father, as a grandfather, I said it made me physically nauseous. And then I followed that up by saying, I don't think that makes me unique. I think that every member of this department, every man and woman who saw the distress of that young lady would have had that same similar reaction. Unfortunately, the part that got repeated was police chief nauseated by acts of officers. So,
and rightfully so.
And that so not inaccurate, but not actually capturing what I tried to convey, which was, yeah, anytime members of this department, this community sees an 11-year-old in distress, physically and emotionally, it tears at your heart for all of us. So, yeah, we weren't happy with that outcome, and we've worked very hard to ensure that we don't have similar experiences in the future.
So, an honest question for an honest answer. Could that have happened on the Northwest side?
Yeah, I've asked myself that, and we've had conversations about that, and I can't give you an honest answer because I can't look into the heart of those officers who made that decision. What I can tell you is I know those officers to be men and women of character, and I do believe in my heart that decision-making was driven by very limited knowledge, the fact that they were reacting to a violent crime, an attempted homicide, and it was very dynamic and quickly evolving. That said, when we talk about implicit bias, it's even hard to explain to some people that we all possess it and that it may actually govern our decision-making subconsciously. So it's a tough question to answer. I don't for a second question the hearts and minds of the officers who were there, but I can't say for certain that given change in certain dynamics that situation may not have played out differently in a different part of the city.
Okay. Commissioner Womack, what was your initial reaction and your response, and how do you think the community should go forward?
When it comes to the incident with the 12-year-old?
That's correct, sir.
Yes, when I saw it, I was nauseated, so the media can print that. I really feel that that's an incident that we have to look closely at. The city commission has said they were going to work with the police to come out with new policies for when dealing with youth. So that was one thing that came out positive. But just looking at it for what it is, it also shows something that I spoke about earlier. You had a chief who comes out and he says some things that the community embraces and say, we're happy the chief says that. The next day, the union comes out, and I do support the police union because I know what great job they do by the police, and I'm not just saying that about the police. I support unions, period, and I know there's a lot of people that's trying to break unions in Western Michigan. So I do support the police union, but with that said, they need to know when to shut up. They need to know when to keep their mouth shut. The police department should have 1 to 2 spokesmen at the most, because they're dealing with some of the most serious issues. And like I said, I support the police union, but they have to understand, you can get an officer killed. You can get people in our community killed. Because you're saying things, and then these officers have to come back to this community, and the officers might not feel the way you said at all. Every officer, just like every one of us in here, we may agree on some things, but if we bring up religion, and we even bring up our executive officer of the United States right now, a lot of us are going to be on different pages. So when the union makes these blanket statements, as they also did with the 5 African-American boys that were held at gunpoint, we thought it was going in a good direction, maybe not as fast as we wanted, but it wasn't going backward. Then the union made a statement, and I'm in a barber shop, and we're all going like, MLive said what? The union said what? I got half my hair cut, and you don't know how I look when half my hair is cut.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next subject.
That's all I want to say. That I just want to say, to answer your question, we have to move on with communication. I love this chief because he does communicate with us. When he tried to leave Grand Rapids, I called and said, yeah, this Commissioner Womack did Rahinsky try to get a job there. You don't hire him. He's terrible. Because I don't want him to leave. I think if you don't respect anything else about this man, you should respect the doors of communications are open. You should respect that he speaks from his heart. And there's a lot of things you can't say, so I'm saying it. Some people in the Grand Police Department need to shut up.
My next subject.